afternoon I found out my husband had died, I was elbow deep in a stranger's shoebox of receipts, trying to figure out whether a man named D'Angelo could legally write off 3 years of fishing trips as business development. The food bank's back office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, same as it had every day for the better part of a decade, and I had the radio turned low to a station that only played songs older than I was. Then my phone lit up on the desk, and the name on the screen stopped my hand cold. My son, Curtis. I hadn't heard his voice in 4 years, not since he hung up on me at Christmas after I made the mistake of saying I loved him. I answered before I could talk myself out of it. He's gone, that was all. No hello, no how are you, no mom. Just 2 flat words, the kind you'd use to report a delayed flight. The funeral Saturday. The will gets read Monday afternoon, downtown, at Holloway's office. I figured you'd find a way to show up regardless, so I might as well tell you. I knew which he. There was only ever one he between us. Curtis, I said. His name came out rusty. I'm so sorry. How did? Don't. Just that. Then, quieter, with a kind of satisfaction I didn't understand at the time, Dad made sure everyone knew exactly how he felt about you before the end. So don't show up expecting anything. You won't get it. The line went dead. I sat there a long time while D'Angelo's receipts went soft and meaningless in my hands. 23 years. That's how long it had been since my whole life came apart on a Tuesday morning in September. 23 years since my son last looked at me like I was his mother instead of something the law had finally caught. You'd want to know who I used to be before the food bank and the apartment over the laundromat in a town you've never heard of. I'll tell you, because the whole thing only makes sense if you understand what there was to lose. My husband's name was Walter, and we built something real together, the 2 of us, from a leaking motor lodge off the interstate that we bought at auction, with $100 in our joint checking account and a loan we had no business qualifying for. I did the books, he did the talking. He was the kind of man who could walk into a bank and make the loan officer feel lucky to be handing over the money, and I was the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning making sure the numbers underneath all that charm actually held. By the time our son was in middle school, we had 11 boutique hotels across Arizona and New Mexico, 400 employees, and a name people in Scottsdale said with a little nod of respect. Brand Hospitality. I designed half those properties on graph paper at the kitchen table. People forget that part now. For a while there, I forgot it too. Then 2008 came, the way it came for everybody, except worse for people carrying as much debt as we were. Occupancy fell off a cliff. The loans came due. And Walter, my Walter, who I'd trusted with my whole adult life, did something I didn't know about until it was nearly too late to undo. To keep a half-built resort outside Santa Fe from dragging us under, he moved money he had no right to move. Investor money, escrow money, $3.1 million that belonged to other people, shuffled around through accounts he hoped to refill before anyone noticed. Somebody noticed. They always do. When the federal auditors started circling, Walter fell apart in a way I'd never seen. He'd had heart trouble for years by then, the kind where the doctors talk in low voices and use the word eventually. He sat on the edge of our bed one night, grey as ash, his hands shaking, and he told me the truth. And then he told me he was going to confess and go to prison. And I watched him say it, and I knew, the way a wife knows, that he wouldn't survive it. Not the trial, not the headlines, not a cell. His heart would stop somewhere in the middle of all of it, and our son would have neither parent, and the company that put a roof over 400 families would die along with him. So I made a choice. I want you to understand it was a choice, mine, made with my eyes open. I was 51 and healthy as a horse. I told him I'd say it was me. It wasn't hard to make it stick. I was the CFO. My signature was on everything anyway. I sat across from a federal prosecutor and said the words, I did it, I moved the funds, my husband knew nothing, and I signed a confession, and I served 26 months in a federal facility outside Phoenix while Walter divorced me, kept our son. and rebuilt the company on the strength of being the wronged man whose own wife had betrayed him. He told Curtis I was a thief, that I'd stolen from people who'd trusted us, that I'd nearly destroyed everything out of greed, that I wasn't the woman either of them had thought I was. And Curtis believed him. Of course he did. He was 15, and his world had cracked open, and a boy that age can't survive losing faith in both parents at once. Better to hate one and keep the other. I understood that even while it was killing me. I told myself I understood it every single day for 23 years. When I got out, I didn't fight. I could have. I could have walked into a newspaper office and told them everything. I knew where the real records were. I could have burned Walter's resurrection to the ground, but I'd made a promise the night before my sentencing. And the promise was, take care of him, meaning our son. And I knew that the moment I told the truth, Curtis would lose his father all over again, and this time he'd be old enough to never recover. So I kept quiet. I moved 200 miles north to a town with one stoplight and a Dairy Queen, and I rented a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat, and I started doing what I'd always been good at, except now it was small. Quarterly taxes for the auto shop, payroll for the nursery, eventually the books for the regional food bank, who paid me in gratitude and a salary that wouldn't have covered my old monthly wine budget. I sent my son a birthday card every year. He never answered one. Twice in those years, plain envelopes showed up in my mailbox with no return address and a few $1,000s in cash inside, and I knew exactly whose guilt was paying for postage, and both times I mailed it back to the corporate office without a note. I didn't want Walter's money. I wanted the one thing he'd taken that money couldn't buy back, and we both knew it. I watched my son grow up from a distance, the way you watch weather move across a valley. I saw the announcement when he made partner at a development firm. I saw a society page photo of his wedding, a girl named Bethany, with a kind face standing next to a man I barely recognized, hard around the eyes. A few years later, there was a birth announcement. Somebody mailed me anonymously, a granddaughter named Hazel, and I cried in the laundromat stairwell until the woman from 2B asked if I needed her to call somebody. I never met Hazel. She'd be 6 now. I'd never heard her voice. And now Walter was dead, and I was going to a funeral. Saturday, I drove down in the same grey Buick I'd had for 9 years and stood in the back of Trinity Cathedral behind 300 people in good black suits. My son sat in the front pew with his wife and a small girl in a navy dress whose feet didn't reach the floor. Hazel, I couldn't see her face from where I stood. Curtis never turned around once. The eulogies built Walter into a saint, a visionary, a self-made man who'd suffered a private betrayal and risen above it with dignity, a devoted father. Nobody said my name. I was the ghost in the back, the disgraced ex-wife in a coat that was a season out of date, and I left before the final hymn because I didn't want my son to see me and feel like he had to decide what his face should do. Monday, I put on the one good blazer I owned and drove back down to a glass tower in the financial district, the kind of building Walter had spent his whole life wanting to own a floor of. Holloway and Pratt occupied the top of it. James Holloway had been our family's attorney for 30 years. He was the one who'd sat beside me during my plea, the one who'd quietly tried to talk me out of it, and then, when he saw I wouldn't be moved, helped me do the most foolish, generous thing I ever did with the dignity it deserved. He knew. He'd always known. He was one of 2 living people who did, and the other one was now in a casket. The receptionist faced it something complicated when I gave my name. "He's expecting you," she said, which was a strange way to put it since he was dead. "Your son's already inside." The conference room had a wall of windows looking out over the whole sprawl of the valley, the mountains brown and patient in the distance. My son sat at the head of the long table, in the seat his father would have taken, in a charcoal suit that cost more than my car was worth. He had Walter's jaw and my mother's eyes, and right now, both of them were aimed at me like I was an item on an agenda he wanted to get through. Lillian, not Mum, My first name handed to me like a parking ticket. Curtis, I said, and I took the chair nearest the door, the farthest one from him, because I'd learned a long time ago to make myself small in rooms where I wasn't wanted. We sat in silence. He scrawled his phone. I looked at my hands. Holloway came in a few minutes later, slower than I remembered, his hair gone fully white, carrying a leather folder thick enough to be a phone book. He was past 70 now. His eyes found mine, and something passed between us, something I can only call recognition, the look of two people who've kept the same secret for 23 years, and are about to watch it stop being a secret. "Thank you both for coming," he said, settling into a chair. "I know this isn't easy." "Let's just get through it, James," my son said. "I've got a 4 o'clock. Of course. Holloway opened the folder. Inside was a thick sheaf of cream-coloured pages. Walter's last will and testament. "Your father revised this 7 months ago," he said, right after his cardiologist gave him the timeline. "He was very specific that he wanted both of you in the room when it was read, no exceptions. He felt strongly about that." Curtis's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Holloway put on his reading glasses and began. "I'll spare you the legal throat-clearing, the revoking of prior wills, the naming of Holloway himself as executor." My son's foot was tapping under the table by the time we got to the part that mattered. "To my son, Curtis Walter Brandt," Holloway read, "I leave the following." Curtis went still. "The residence at Camelback Mountain, including all furnishings and contents." A pause. "My controlling interest in Brandt Hospitality Group, and the contents of my personal investment account at Pacific Mercantile." I watched my son's shoulders come down half an inch, watched the smallest curl of a smile, the smile of a man who has just been told the empire is his. The Camelback house alone was worth 8 or 9 million. The company was the real prize, of course, the thing he'd been groomed for his whole life. "However," Holloway said, and the word landed in the room like a dropped glass, "these bequests come with certain disclosures your father insisted be read aloud." Curtis frowned. "Disclosures?" "The Camelback residence," Holloway read, "carries a $4 million line of credit I drew against it over the past 2 years to cover medical expenses and to keep the Santa Fe property current. Whoever inherits the home inherits the debt." He turned a page. "As to Brandt Hospitality, while my son will hold the controlling interest, he should be aware that the company is presently the defendant in 2 lawsuits totaling $31 million, that our cash position has been severely depleted by my decisions over the last several years, and that the business is solvent only in the most technical sense. It will require a significant infusion of capital and no fewer than 5 years of disciplined, honest management to become what it appears to be on paper." My son had gone pale. "That can't be right." "Your father was very clear." Holloway didn't look up. He wrote, and I'm quoting him now, "I'm leaving you the thing itself, Curtis, not the picture of it. I want you to find out the difference the hard way, the way I never made you. The view from the top is a lot of glass and not much floor." "He's punishing me," Curtis said, his voice climbing. "I'd say he's teaching you," Holloway answered gently, "or trying to." My son's hands closed into fists on the mahogany, but he said nothing. He just sat there, breathing through it. And for the first time in that room, I saw something under the hard, expensive shell of him, something 15 years old and frightened. "Now," Holloway said, turning another page, "to my former wife, Lillian Brandt." I braced. Here it was. The last word, the public period at the end of the sentence. Everyone had spent 2 decades believing about me. I'd have settled for nothing at all. Nothing would have been a mercy. "I leave the sum of $100. My son laughed. It came out of him sharp and ugly, a bark of pure delight, and it was somehow worse than anything he could have said. $100, he repeated, savouring it. "God, that's perfect. That's exactly what you deserve, Lillian. Not even rent on that dump you live in." He leaned back, and the satisfaction in his face was so complete that for a moment it almost outweighed the bad news about his own inheritance. He could lose the company and still walk out happy, as long as I'd gotten less, as long as the universe had finally agreed with him about me. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I folded my hands and I kept my face still the way prison teaches you to, and I thought, distantly, that $100 was a strangely specific number, and then I told myself to stop looking for meaning in my own humiliation. But Holloway wasn't closing the folder. He turned a page, and then another. "If we've concluded the initial bequests," he said, and his voice had changed, taken on a weight I hadn't heard from him in 23 years, "I'll move to the remainder of the estate." My son's laughter stopped. The remainder? Yes. Holloway looked up, and his eyes came to rest on me, and they were wet. "There's quite a lot of it." He cleared his throat and read. "To Lillian, I additionally leave the following: the Santa Fe property and all associated land valued at $22 million. My art collection, held in storage, valued at approximately $14 million. My remaining ownership in Brand Hospitality, comprising the balance of the company not bequeathed to my son. My securities portfolio at Pacific Mercantile, valued at $119 million. The accounts held in my own name, totaling $26 million. Holloway paused. "All told, an estate of approximately $180 million. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the building's air handling. My son's face had drained to the color of paper. His mouth opened and closed and made no sound at all. "And further," Holloway went on, his voice not quite steady now, "I have established a trust that will pay Lillian $4 million a year for the rest of her life, adjusted for inflation, with the remainder to flow as she directs." "No." My son's whisper. "No, that's wrong. He wasn't in his right mind. He was sick. I'll contest it. He was entirely lucid," Holloway said, "and now there was steel in it. I have written competency findings from 3 independent physicians and a recorded statement, made the same afternoon he signed. He knew exactly what he was doing." He set down the will and picked up a separate envelope, sealed, fat, with handwritten pages. "Which brings us to the last thing your father asked me to do. He wrote you both a letter. He was very clear that I read it aloud. No exceptions." My son looked like he might be sick. I felt like I was watching all of it from the ceiling, weightless, unable to make my mind believe what my ears had heard. Holloway opened the envelope and began to read, and my husband's voice walked back into the room from the other side of death. "To my son, you're angry right now, you're confused, and you feel like the ground has gone out from under you, and you feel betrayed. Good. Now you know how your mother felt 23 years ago, the morning the FBI walked her out of a building she helped build for a crime she did not commit. She did not commit it. I did. I took that money, Curtis, $3 million that belonged to people who trusted us. I moved it to save a project I'd been too proud to admit was failing, and when I got caught, I was too much of a coward to face it. I have a bad heart, you know that, and I told myself a trial would kill me, and maybe that was even true. But the truth underneath the truth is that I was a frightened man, and your mother was the bravest person I have ever known, and when she offered to take it from me, I let her. I let her sign a confession to my crime. I let her go to prison. I let her lose her name, her work, her freedom, and worst of all, I let her lose you. She did it to keep me alive, and she did it so that you would still have one parent standing when the smoke cleared. That was the whole of what she asked me the night before they took her. Take care of our boy. She gave up her entire life so you wouldn't lose yours. And then I spent the next 2 decades telling you she was a thief. Every dollar I made after that, every property, every award, every nice thing said about me at the funeral you just sat through, was built on her back. I planted my second life in the grave of her reputation. I knew it every single morning, and I said nothing, and I watched her mail back the money I tried to send her because she would not take 1 cent of what my lie had paid for. I was crying by then, quietly, the old way, the way you learn to cry when you can't afford to be heard. Across the table, my son had both hands over his mouth. The company I'm leaving you is real, Curtis. Debts and lawsuits and all. That's the only honest thing I have left to give. I'm not handing you the polished version. I'm handing you the actual thing, the way it actually is, because I want you to learn what I never did, which is that anything built on a lie is built on sand, and the tide always comes in. Your mother has more integrity in one hand than I had in my whole body. I'm not giving her the estate to punish you. I'm giving it to her because it was always hers. It's 23 years of a life I stole, returned as late as a thing can possibly be returned. It will not be enough. Nothing could be. And there's one more thing, and I did it while I could still sign my name. 3 weeks ago, I filed a sworn affidavit with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the court, taking full responsibility for the embezzlement and stating under oath that your mother was innocent. The process to vacate her conviction is already underway. By the time you hear this, the record is being corrected. Her name is being cleared, not in a private letter where it's easy, but in the public place where I ruined it. I should have done it 20 years ago when it would have given her back her life. I did it 3 weeks before my death, when it costs me nothing. That is the measure of the man your eulogies described. Don't be him. Curtis, you can fight this will. You can spend your mother's money on lawyers trying to take back what was never ours. Or you can do the one thing I was never brave enough to do. You can go to her, and you can tell her the truth, and you can ask, not for forgiveness, because you haven't earned it yet, but for the chance to earn it. She'll know the difference. She always knew the difference. That's why I loved her, and that's why I failed her. Holloway's voice broke on the last lines, and he steadied himself and finished. Lillian, I have no right to your forgiveness, and I'm not going to insult you by asking for it. I just need you to hear, once in a room with witnesses, the only true thing I know: you were innocent, you were brave, and you were better than all of us. I'm sorry. I hope you build something beautiful with what I'm finally giving back. You were always the better builder. I just had the louder voice. The letter ended. Holloway set the pages down with great care, like they might break. The silence afterward was its own living thing. Then my son made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. He stood up so fast his chair toppled, and for half a second I thought he was going to walk out. But instead he came around the long table to where I sat, and he dropped down onto his knees beside my chair, this grown man in his expensive suit, and he put his face in my lap, and he sobbed. "Mum," he said into the wool of my old blazer, the first time in 23 years. "Mum, I'm sorry, oh God, the things I said to you." I put my hand on the back of his head. His hair was thinning at the crown, like his father's. When did that happen? When did my little boy start going thin at the crown? "I know," I said. "I know, sweetheart." I don't know how long we stayed like that. Holloway slipped out at some point and left us the room. The light moved across the mountains and went gold and then grey. My son cried himself empty the way he used to as a small child when the world had been too big and too unfair, and I held him through it, and somewhere in there I stopped being able to tell whose grief was whose. When he finally lifted his head, his face was wrecked, red and swollen, and he looked younger than he had in years, more like himself. "I don't want any of it," he said. "The house, the company. It's all built on what he did to you. I can't keep it." "Your father wanted you to have the company," I said, "debts and all. He wanted you to learn how to build something honest. He was right that you should." "I don't know how to build anything honest." His voice cracked. "I only know how to win. He taught me that. Win at any cost. That's the only thing I'm good at." "Then you'll learn the other thing," I said. "It's not too late to learn the other thing." I did, at 53, in a town with one stoplight. "You've got a head start on me." He grabbed my hands. "Teach me, please. I'll do whatever I held on to him, but I didn't say yes right away, and I want to be honest with you about why. Because forgiveness that comes too fast isn't forgiveness, it's just relief wearing forgiveness's coat, and I'd spent too long being the woman who made everything easy for everybody else. So I looked at my son and I told him the truth. I love you, I said. I never stopped, not for one day. But 23 years doesn't close up because your father wrote a letter. We don't get to skip to the end. You're going to have to actually know me again, the real me, not the thief your father invented and not the saint he wrote about today, somebody in between. And that takes time, and it takes showing up over and over when it isn't dramatic and nobody's reading a will. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Yes, whatever it takes. Then we start there, I said. Slow, honest, no more lies in this family, not even kind ones. We've all seen where those go. He nodded against my hands. And then I asked him the only thing I wanted in that whole gleaming room full of money. Tell me about Hazel, I said. I've never met my granddaughter. I don't know if she likes to read or if she's afraid of the dark. I don't know anything. 6 years, Curtis. I'd like them back, the ones we can still get. My son started crying again, but it was a different kind this time. She's going to love you, he said. She's stubborn like you. Bethany always says so, and she's never even met you. I talk about you sometimes when I'm angry, and Bethany says she sounds like Hazel. He wiped his face. I have a picture. Do you want to? I did. I wanted it more than the $180 million, and that's not a figure of speech. That was 3 months ago. I'll tell you where it stands because I think the part after the will is the part that actually matters, the part nobody puts on a thumbnail. I kept some of the money and I gave most of it away with intention. I sold the Santa Fe property and the Camelback house after I paid off the line of credit so my son wouldn't start his honest life drowning. I put $100 million into a foundation, the Brand Restoration Fund, that does 2 things. It pays for the legal work to overturn wrongful convictions, and it helps people coming out of prison rebuild the way I had to rebuild, alone at 53, with $12 and a bus ticket. I know exactly what that walk out the gate feels like. Now I get to make it shorter for somebody else. I kept enough to be comfortable and to be useful. I'm putting the rest the same way I spent my whole quiet exile, into small things in small towns, the auto shops and the nurseries and the diners, the kind of unglamorous building that actually holds people up, just with more zeros now. My conviction was formally vacated 6 weeks ago. There was a hearing, brief and almost gentle, and the judge said some words about a grave injustice, and my son sat in the gallery behind me, and afterward we got tacos from a truck and ate them on the hood of my old Buick, because neither of us wanted to go anywhere fancy. The state sent me a letter that said my record was clear. I framed it. It hangs in my apartment over the laundromat, which I have not given up, because I like the woman in 2B, and I like the sound of the dryers at night, and $180 million doesn't change what a home is. Curtis runs Brand Hospitality now, smaller and slower and straighter than his father ever did. He fired 2 executives who'd been quietly bleeding the place. He settled the lawsuits honestly instead of crushing the plaintiffs, which cost more and which I was proud of. He calls me twice a week and shows up on Sundays, and sometimes the old hardness flickers back across his face when he's tired. And sometimes I'm too sharp with him out of 23 years of habit, and we're learning each other the way 2 adults learn, with apologies and patience and a lot of long pauses on the phone. And I met Hazel. She is stubborn and she's afraid of the dark, but won't admit it, and she calls me Gigi because Grandma felt like too many syllables. And the first afternoon I spent with her, she fell asleep in my lap on the back porch while I read to her, and I sat very still for 2 hours so I wouldn't wake her. And I cried the whole time silently, the old prison way, except this time it was the good kind, the kind you'd never want to stop. You want to know about the $100? I did too, for weeks. I asked Holloway about it, because Walter never did anything by accident, and a man leaving his innocent wife the symbolic insult of $100 in front of the son who hated her, that was a man making a point. Holloway pulled an old folder and showed me. $100 was the exact balance in the joint checking account the night we signed the lease on that leaking motor lodge, the very first one, before any of it. We'd had exactly $100 and a stupid amount of hope. Walter knew I'd remember. He left it to me in front of everyone so that someday, after the room cleared and the truth settled, I'd understand he was telling me, this is where it really started. The two of us with nothing, and you were the one who knew how to build. Start there again. So I am. I lost 23 years with my son, and the money won't buy a single one of them back, and I've stopped pretending otherwise. That grief lives in me, and it always will. But I'm not living in the lost years anymore. I'm living in the Sunday afternoons and the twice-a-week phone calls, and a 6-year-old asleep on a porch who thinks I hung the moon. I had today when I started writing this. By the time you hear it, I'll have had a few more, and I intend to spend every one of them awake. The $100 sat in my purse for 3 days before I understood it, and when I finally did, I had to pull the Buick over to the shoulder because I couldn't see the road through my own eyes. Walter didn't leave me that money to insult me. He left it as a map back to the one true thing the night two broke kids signed a lease on a leaking motel with nothing but $100 and too much hope. He was telling me where to start over. And the reason I could read that map at all, after 23 years of being called a thief, is the same reason any of this ended the way it did. Nothing happens for no reason. Every result in my life grew from a seed somebody planted, including me. I think about my son Curtis on his knees in that conference room, finally crying for the right thing, and I understand that he became cold because his father taught him that winning was the only thing that kept you safe. That was a seed too. Walter planted ruthlessness in our boy and called it strength, and it grew exactly the way you'd expect. The miracle isn't that Curtis was hard. The miracle is that underneath all that hardness, there was still a 15-year-old who missed his mother, and that he was willing, at last, to do the harder thing instead of the winning thing. If I've learned anything worth passing to you, it's that a life holds up on 3 legs, and you need all 3. The first is doing right, even when right costs you everything and nobody is watching to applaud it. I took a confession that wasn't mine and mailed back money I could have used, not because anyone would know, but because I would know. The second is using your head, seeing the long shape of a thing when everyone around you is reacting to the moment. I didn't forgive Curtis the instant he wept. Tears are cheap and 23 years are not. So I asked him for time and proof, and Sunday afternoons instead, because love without clear eyes just becomes another way to get hurt. And the third is the plain refusal to lie down. At 53, with $12 and a bus ticket, I built a small, honest life out of strict mall tax returns, and that stubbornness is the only reason I was still standing upright when the truth finally came home. You don't get to choose what gets planted in you. I didn't choose prison, and Curtis didn't choose the cold father who shaped him. But you do get to choose what you grow from here, today, with whatever's in your hands. Be the kind of person who does right in the dark. Be clear-eyed enough to tell real love from easy relief, and be too stubborn to stay down, no matter how late the truth arrives. I got my son back at 74. I met a granddaughter who calls me Gigi at 6. None of it was owed to me, and all of it was earned, one honest, clear-headed, unbending day at a time. Plant better than what was planted in you. That's the whole of it.